Stateless-Shinobi and seekers of truth. Welcome back to the Stateless-Shinobi Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Snow, and today we'll be diving deep into the enigmatic concepts of the zeitgeist, reality, and the way that they interplay with our socialization to create our personalized perceptions of the world. We'll untangle their meanings, explore the differences, and understand how these concepts shape our individual identities and values. So let's jump right in. First, let's tackle the zeitgeist. I know it's a weird word, but don't worry, we'll break it down. So the zeitgeist is a German term which literally translates to time spirit. Essentially, it's the cultural spirit of the time in which you find yourself, a collective consciousness that influences our beliefs and values. Zeitgeist is like the soundtrack to an era that you're living in, setting the tone and shaping the cultural landscape. To better understand this concept, let's explore a few historical and contemporary examples of this phenomenon. In the 1960s, the hippie movement symbolized peace and love, capturing the spirit of an era. The civil rights movement in the 20th century challenged societal norms, reflecting the zeitgeist of reform and the adoption of counterculture in the pursuit of equality and justice. In the modern age, consider the rise of social media, how it shapes our perceptions and opinions, and even our identities. Think about how Instagram creates an idealized reality where filters and perceptions and influencers dictate concepts like self-worth and definitions of success. The effects of globalization and digitalization on our awareness of each other and the world. The numerous talking heads, political pundits, and public intellectuals who influence us daily. The rise of hacktivism, the proliferation of misinformation, and the ideologies and personalities that shape our perspectives on everything from economics to fashion. All of these are agents in turn that affect our perception and influence our perception of both the culture and the world. Things like metrics of success, masculine and feminine archetypes, and even lack of empathy towards humanity's darker activities like war and persecution can typically fall at the feet of cultural acceptance or cultural adoption of the zeitgeist perception of reality. Now, unlike the polished and spun narratives and values of success that the zeitgeist offers, let's delve into the nature of reality and how it can differ from the cultural intoxication provided to the masses through the cultural zeitgeist. Reality is the unfiltered truth, embracing the nuances of existence and the variability of individual experience. World War II and the Great Depression were harsh realities of the time, affecting lives and shaping history. Similarly, cultures perceived those times very differently. There were different zeitgeists. But the reality of the situation is there were poor people who were starving, there were people who were dying in war. However, the perceptions of those things happening was largely shaped by individuals' perception. Think of the Enlightenment era as well, where reason and rationality emerged as a counterbalance against the religious dogma that was being perpetrated throughout the world, especially in Europe by the Catholic Church. In this context, realities of scientific discovery and intellectual inquiry challenged traditional beliefs. Fast forward to the 21st century, where climate change, a stark reality, is threatening our planet, we can't ignore the fact that the environment needs our attention and action. But the perception of that interplay is largely based upon a few other things, as we all know. Now let's decode the zeitgeist in reality. We must understand the role that socialization plays on the perceptions of these two things. Socialization is the third component of this triumvirate, which ultimately shapes the worldview and perceptions of individuals. Socialization is the process by which individuals learn and internalize values, norms, and behaviors their culture has as expressed through their immediate experience with their own cultural groups. It's how we become a part of society, and it heavily influences our perception of both the zeitgeist and reality. Socialization begins at a very young age. The moment you come out your mom, you're beginning to be socialized. She tells you, hey, eating after this time, that's not how we do it. Or, hey, eating this thing is not how we do it. These are all components of our socialization. We get socialization from our parents, our peers, the media, institutions, and like I said before, it really shapes your worldview, helping you to fit into the cultural tapestry that is the zeitgeist of your time. Let's explore this paradigm as employed in three separate spheres: the religious, the social, and the political. First, let's take the religious sphere. And like I said before, in medieval times, the zeitgeist was largely shaped by dogmatic beliefs, but the reality of scientific discoveries, like for instance, Galileo's heliocentrism, challenged the status quo of those institutions. However, those with vested interests and significant socializations in said dogmatic beliefs and institutions resisted the reality of these discoveries. And we see that now even with flat earthers versus, people who employ scientific methods and aren't opposed to accepting scientific information. Many of these instances of scientific realization or understanding or perception or measurability of the reality are often resisted by those who are socialized into dogmatic beliefs, even though they contravene reality. The zeitgeist-born dogma is a universal characteristic of fanatical religious socialization in all religions and belief systems. I know I used Catholicism as a for instance or an analogy, not an analogy, but you get my drift, an illustration. But honestly, it's something that's employed across the board, and it's something that we have to address and we have to recognize. In this instance, individuals have to navigate between faith as espoused by the institutions that they're related to or the religious leaders that they fall under and their own individual reason. This paradigm in turn illustrates how the zeitgeist and reality can clash based upon the socialization and education of the individual. For that reason, socialization plays a crucial role in how people perceive and accept new truths. And it is my personal belief, this is just me, I'm just talking to you guys from the Stateless-Shinobi studio, that most, if not all, religions, if employed correctly without dogmatic socialization, can serve as a good metric through which we can better discern and operate within reality. If you go down that fanatical road, you won't be able to understand the true nature of your reality. You have to have a healthy skepticism, not an unhealthy skepticism that drifts into paranoia and conspiracy theories with no substantiating fact, but a healthy skepticism and a healthy employment of your own personal logic and reasoning. That being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the second sphere, which is the social sphere. In this sphere, I'd like to explore, let's just say, like I said before, the zeitgeist during the 60s, the counterculture movement, and the reality of the racial inequality that led to the civil rights movement in the United States. Individuals were torn between two social spheres encapsulated within the zeitgeist of their time. One was an element of reason and change that made observations about the inequities between individuals inside of the country, and the other one was based upon the harsh for some and seemingly beneficial for others reality of maintaining racial discrimination. Socialization played a vital role in determining which side of the struggle individuals fell on. And you can see this even with, grandparents who, once upon a time they were, full of vitriol for racial integration. And then later, as society changed and they were exposed and socialized in different ways, those sort of mentalities fell away. A lot of them have mixed race children now or grandchildren now. And you really wouldn't think that would be possible. But this is one of the cool things about socialization and reason that you kind of have to acknowledge is that, people are capable of change, but they have to be open to it. Now, while that being said, like I said before, a lot of this, because of the socialization, if you were a certain individual who's experiencing this oppression, you had a different level of understanding and you were pushing for social justice and equality. Whereas if you seemingly were benefiting from this and socialized to know that you were benefiting from this, you were numb to it. And I feel like that's a paradigm that a lot of individuals, even today, with some of the cultural wars that are going on today, don't really want to open themselves up to. We hear the term privilege thrown around all the time, but it can be a bit of a buzzword, but it's also a reality if you would open yourself up to the understanding that, hey, maybe I did get something that another person didn't have available to them. And it's not a smack against you. It's not trying to bring you down on any sort of level. It's just asking for a simple acknowledgement and a taking of accountability that, hey, maybe I did get a leg up in this particular race. Now, to take it out of the social sphere, let's move it on to what is, they always say don't talk about religion and politics, but we don't do that on this channel. We're definitely going to hit on those often. So I'm going to take it to the political sphere. So let's just consider how the zeitgeist interplays with the politics inside of our country during this digital age. I mean, not saying that these things didn't happen previously, but they were a little bit more consolidated and not as publicized to the masses, as it were. We've seen how social media can amplify misinformation. It can create alternative realities, and in many instances, this phenomenon can be realized through like the creation of similarly socialized individuals congregating together online and creating echo chambers of influence that twist or otherwise alter the perception of real experiences or real understandings or even scientific observations of the so-called other group. And really, it's just a tool for those groups to establish and feel validated through their own confirmation bias. There's a old proverb that if you go out and look to find something, or if you look for something bad, odds are you're going to find it. And that's never more true than when people who all have similar viewpoints and aren't being exposed to external viewpoints or external perceptions, how they tend to bounce the same negative observations off of each other, or even point to the worst of a particular group rather than taking the group as a whole. And that's what I notice a lot in politics is you see, oh, the left is this or the right is this. And not all of them are that. People are not monolithic. Groups are not monolithic. We all have different levels of understanding, different levels of socialization, different levels of cultural exposure, different levels of education. And these are things that have to be taken into account. But especially in our current two-party system, what I notice a lot is like, okay, the right will point at to the furthest leaning lefts and get their talking points. And then the left will do the same thing. The furthest leaning people on the right is who they want to talk to, rather than us in any way acknowledging that, hey, they don't talk for everybody. And perhaps some of the elements of that right side may be correct. Maybe some of the elements of that left side may be correct. But we keep fighting against the two extremes. And that's really what I feel like is tying us up and making sure that we don't make any real progress. So through all that, individuals must you have to discern between the zeitgeist of online narratives and the reality of verified facts. Socialization affects how people interpret and trust information in this digital era, and it can influence, even the trusted sources that we want to go to, like the news media and things like that, through the sort of insidious and oftentimes unintentional insertion of opinion-based observations as actual reality or actual fact. Oftentimes you'll see, CNN is unthing or Fox is not thing. There are elements in truth in each, but if you lack discernment and you lack the ability to tell when a biased observation is made or when an unfair categorization is made, or when a lot of times these flawed narratives are coming from logical errors or fallacies, if you lack the understanding of that paradigm, then you're going to see everything as unreliable. And that's what's led to, this new age of people thinking, oh, well, I can just go to this blog because they're more reliable than this group, or they're more reliable than this group. I think a lot of times people want to point to the source rather than themselves, rather than their own level of understanding or education in order to get to the truth. And that's a real issue, especially in the political sphere. Citizens, they have to decipher campaign rhetoric from actual outcomes. And you have to sort of actively resist having socialization or the zeitgeist influence your perceptions and your voting decisions, which is something that I've noticed a lot of people do. Oh, everybody in my town is voting for this guy. Everybody in my town is voting for this guy. You're not this racial group if you vote this way. You're not this racial group if you vote that way. Let's just call that what it is, ignorant. It's ignorant. I personally, and not to get too personal, but I personally consider myself an independent. I like to vote for candidates based upon their voting records, for one, and if that voting record aligns with my personal values. let's say this right here. Stateless-Shinobi is never going to tell you who to vote for. I'm never going to tell you who to support. I believe that as an American citizen, everyone has the right to make their own decisions. Now, whether or not I think that decision is dumb, I can definitely say, but I will never try and take away or influence who you decide to vote for. I just think that that's one of the great things about being an American is that, hey, you can be as wrong as 2 left feet here if you want to. That's your right. As long as it doesn't infringe on my rights, go and do you, bro. And you know, that's just me personally. Sorry to take a segment, but to bring it back, like I said, the political sphere is one that I really think is largely influenced by the zeitgeist and socialization. You hear it all the time. Oh, I'm going to vote Republican because my father voted Republican, my grandfather voted Republican, his great-grandfather, my whole church votes Republican. Or by that same token, I'm going to vote Democrat because everybody in my high school or everybody in my college or everybody, you know, if I told them that I voted this way. And I feel like when it comes to something as personal and as intentional as that, we all have to educate ourselves more. We all have to be a little bit more investigative. We have to put more effort into employing our own logic and reason to voting for outcomes that we want. Not the ones that they say they're going to give us, but the ones that they've demonstrated they're capable of doing. And that's something that I feel like goes for both sides across the board, state, local, federal, however you want to vote. Just keep that in mind. But I guess after we go through, you know, the political sphere, the social sphere, and the religious sphere, the next question is, you know, how do we handle this crazy interplay? So, you know, there you have it. You have the zeitgeist, the collective spirit of the time, socialization, your personal lived experience or cultural experience interwoven within the zeitgeist, and reality, the hard, cold truth of the facts. And now that we've recognized those 3 components, we have to sort of look at the complex tango that they play in our lives. You know, how they shape our beliefs and our perceptions. And it really falls to us to discern between them, and how we have to understand that if we take or make decisions without taking them all in context, or we just, you know, pick and choose, I'm just going to fall on my socialization to make this decision, or I'm just going to fall on what's the social norm or in line with the zeitgeist to make this decision. How those sorts of things can ultimately be used to deceive you and manipulate you into acting against your own best interests. So the next following question that sort of comes from that is like, how do you do that? How do you get a handle on that? And I'm not going to say that this is the total answer, but I think it's a great start. And it's not simple, and it requires a deep understanding of oneself and your own desires. But we'll jump into it. This is just my breakdown of how I think you can begin the journey of starting to do that and get rid of some of this existential angst of not knowing who to trust or not knowing what decision will be best in your life. The first step is, of course, self-reflection and values alignment. These are so important. A lot of people get caught up in the world. They get caught up in what's going on out here, over there, with that person, with that other person. Take some time and think about yourself, you know. Learn yourself. Do some shadow work. Think about what you value personally, not what is valued by other people or what you can value to make you look good to other people, but what is personally valuable to you. What will make just you, not other people, without the components of anybody outside of you, what will make you happy? What values do you feel fulfilled when you employ? You have to take time to reflect on your decisions, their underlying motivations, and really ask yourself, are you making this choice because it aligns with your core values, beliefs, and long-term goals? Or is it primarily driven by external pressures or trends or expectations? Ask yourself whether the decision resonates with your authentic self. Does it feel like a genuine expression of your individuality, or does it seem more like you're conforming to like a prevailing culture or social norm? And with that, I'll give you guys a little analogy. So I came up poor in the south side of Atlanta. Well, I won't say poor. Let's say lower middle class. My mom worked very hard, single mother. And the societal norm in my high school was, hey, you had to wear this particular type of shoes. You had to have, you know, these particular clothing brands. in order to, fit the mold, the quote unquote mold. And of course, this is years ago. If you're a younger viewer, I'm sure you don't know these brands, but like Jabot or Fubu or Polo, you had to fit a certain mold. And my mom wasn't having it. Honestly, and I have to recognize that if you're spending that type of money for children on clothes and you were in a situation or the area that we were, you were deluding yourself and not doing things in your long-term financial interest. But you were doing that in order to conform to a prevailing cultural or social norm. And I see a lot of people, especially young males, sort of fall into this trap where they try and align their own value with the value that society wants to give them. And that's something that we have to stop doing. That's something that we have to break the mold on. You have to consider, whether you would still make the same choice if you were in a different social or cultural context, right? Like if you were in Afghanistan, like would it matter if you had brand new white Air Force Ones? Is that really a value that you're bringing to the table? I honestly don't think it is, or it would be. I think that there are far more pertinent and important things to develop within oneself than what you put on your body. And that's just that's not saying you can't have nice things, but you can't let those things own you. You can't let those things define you. There's an old saying that clothes don't make a man, the man makes the clothes. And I feel like that's a idiom that we need to live by and understand. Just, falling more into that analogy for this paradigm, don't make decisions based upon what other people see as valuable. Base them upon what you see as valuable in serving your values and your long-term goals. Now, that's self-reflection and values alignment. Next, let's move on to the second component, which I think is equally as important, which is critical thinking and research. This is one of the things that I feel like 1,001 people say, oh, I've done the research. They've done the research, but they haven't done the critical thinking. Or they'll sit there and be like, well, I've thought about this a long time. And they thought about it a long time, but they thought about it with their limited understanding and their limited level of education. Without employing both of these at the same time, it's really for naught. Like you're not going to get a real consummate understanding of the reality of your situation. So in order to do that, you should conduct thorough research and gather information to make informed decisions. This includes, and I'm going to say this because I notice a lot of people don't like to do this, this includes seeking diverse perspectives. I know one of the things that a lot of people like to do, and I spoke about it earlier, is a lot of people fall into like YouTube echo chambers. The algorithm is built to affirm your confirmation bias. If you go looking for it, it's going to give it to you. So what I always do whenever I'm researching a topic is I always research the antithesis of whatever statement that I believe I agree with. Because you never know, there could be a factoid or a research component that will totally shift your perspective and understanding of the topic. So a lot of people, they'll be like, do the research. And they have spent hours going down YouTube holes and spent hours, reading things, but they haven't taken the time to look at any of the perspectives on the other side. They're just hitting an echo chamber. The only real understanding of a situation, an argument, a misalignment of values between groups, between individuals, comes from reaching across the aisle and getting an understanding of other people's perspectives. Then, once you have that information, everything becomes more clear. Of course, you have to have reliable data. You have to find expert opinions. And by expert, I don't mean people like me on YouTube telling you what to do. Just talking heads who are really here to educate as much as inform. But also really to entertain, because that's, it's all about the dollar bill. Like, they wouldn't continue to do what they were doing if they weren't making bread off of you. So they want to give you what you want so that you'll continue to watch them and that they will get more bread off of you. And this isn't a shot at anybody because, cash rules everything around me. You have to, in this capitalistic society, you have to earn money to, live. But a simple acknowledgement of that fact will give you greater perspective when you're ingesting this information from these people. If you're unable to find an unbiased source, you have to employ your own discernment. Look for the actual facts and what they're saying without ingesting opinion-based commentary. Evaluate the potential motivations behind whatever person is talking, why they would say that. I see this a lot when like people pull up little factoids on, vaping isn't that bad, or doing this or that isn't that bad because this research institute said that. And then you go and look at the funding mechanism for that research institute, and it's directly funded by people who will get a monetary benefit for that institute saying what they say. So, like I said, you'd be surprised at how many things are motivated simply by money in our capitalistic society. But that's one rabbit hole that I feel like whenever you do research, you always have to look at. You have to look at the motivations of the people releasing that information. And finally, as you're doing that, and this is the critical thinking part, you have to consider whether it genuinely serves your well-being and personal growth, or if it's merely a response to external expectations or peer pressure. A lot of times, again, when you're looking at research, like, I don't know many people on the right or on Fox News who would say something bad about the Second Amendment, right? You're not going to see that too often. You're not going to see too many people on the left who are going to say, hey, these trans individuals are going too far. And that's not to say that I'm adopting either one of those perspectives, but you have to, recognize where it is that you fall in those two paradigms, recognize the paradigms that they're operating in, right? And make your own value and assessments from there. I like weapons. I think that firearms are cool. I have no problem with transsexuals. If that's the lifestyle that you want to live, it's totally up to you. Your freedom ends at the tip of my nose, and my freedom ends at the tip of your nose, and we're all Americans, so let's all get along. But just recognizing that, hey, there are certain perspectives and certain things that we're not going to see. You have to recognize that even those news outlets and those even some of those scientific or health boards, they are under their own forms of social or zeitgeist-born external expectations or pressure. And that's just something to acknowledge. So moving on from critical thinking and research, we're going to get to our last sort of thing that you can adopt to wade through the zeitgeist, socialization, and your individual perception. And that is consulting trusted advisors and seeking feedback. Discussion and feedback and just a solid critique is one of the greatest ways that you can grow. That's why at the end of this, I'm going to ask you guys to drop comments on how you think I can improve for the next episode. Because a person who is resistant to critiques is a person who is resistant to growth. If you're scared to hear that you're doing something wrong, then you will continue to do that thing wrong for the rest of your life. You have to be open and willing to accept critiques. Now, whether or not you want to follow through with them, or if you agree with them, that could come second, but you have to be willing to at least listen and to allow whatever critique that's coming your way to, go through your own logical processes. So, you can do that by discussing your decisions with trusted friends, family members, or mentors who really, truly, have your interests at heart, because they can provide valuable insight and alternative viewpoints that you won't really get from other people or just third-party sources or just going online. I know a lot of young people, they have a real issue with bringing these sorts of things to, their parents or teachers or mentors, because they're like, oh, they're going to judge me. Odds are they've already been there. They've already done that. They've already experienced it. And if you have a strong enough relationship, they just want you to make the right decision. So you have to lean on those relationships, and you have to lean on those judgments. Of course, this comes with the caveat that they have their own bias. So a lot of times what they may see as beneficial for you may not necessarily be beneficial for you. And that's why, again, the critical thinking and research comes into play. This is something you have to do yourself. You can take that information, always be open to information, but whether or not you adopt it, whether or not it aligns with your values and your long-term goals, that's going to be something that ultimately comes up to you. So there you go, by applying that sort of 3-point test of self-reflections, values alignment, critical thinking and research, and seeking trusted advisors and feedback. If you do those 3 things, you're pretty much set up to have a clearer perspective on whether your decisions are influenced by socialization, by the zeitgeist, or if they, genuinely serve your best interests. it's essential to be mindful of these influences and pretty much all the choices that you make. And you have to make sure that the choices you do make in your life align with your authentic self and your long-term goals and well-being, and not just, agreeing with or keeping up with the proverbial Joneses. Sorry about that stutter there. So with that, as we conclude this enlightening journey into the intricate interplay of zeitgeist, reality, and socialization, I want to encourage you, our dedicated listeners, to take action and apply, the wisdom that you may or may not have gained from being an active participant in this conversation. Share this episode with your friends and family. Have a conversation. Talk about the zeitgeist, reality, and socialization with them. Get their takes from it. See if they think it's influenced you or influenced them in their lives. And let's, begin to foster a community of critical thinkers who can navigate these complexities in our ever-changing world and put it into the current culture wars and conflicts that we're having for people just not understanding these fundamental things about perceptions. That's sort of plaguing our society right now. And it's tragic, because if we could just come to a certain level of understanding and enlightenment as far as the formation of perspectives and the role that socialization has on individuals, I feel like we'd be way more accepting and way more understanding of those opposing perceptions. So with that, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Stateless-Shinobi Podcast here on YouTube. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you thought-provoking content, and join our online community where we'll continue to have conversations on really thought-provoking topics. You can connect with us on social media and share your insights, questions, or experiences. Like I said before, go ahead and drop some comments down there. If you have a topic that you'd like to discuss or a question, I'll try and get to it as soon as I can. But, with that, remember, it's your discernment that empowers you to navigate the zeitgeist and reality. So let's embark on that journey together and seek truth and understanding for ourselves and with the other people around us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep evolving. This is the Stateless-Shinobi Podcast, signing off with a promise of more illuminating discussions in the future. Have a great one, guys. Can't wait to see you next time.